December 1944, the Ardennes, Hitler's last great gamble in the West, is about to begin. The whole offensive was built on a single promise that German tanks would capture Allied fuel. But here is the part that still stuns military historians. The tanks ran dry just 30 miles short of the prize. 30 miles, that is the distance the entire plan collapsed short of its goal. And the reason is not what you think. It was not the Allies who stopped them. Fuel, weather, and a single map line, that is what really decided the Battle of the Bulge. To understand the gamble, we have to go back to September 1944. By then, the Western Allies had broken out of Normandy and were racing across France. Germany's army in the West was shattered. Its leaders believed the war could end by Christmas. But Hitler saw it differently. He saw an opportunity, a weak, overextended Allied line. The Ardennes forest, dense, hilly, and thinly held, the Allies called it a quiet sector. So Hitler chose it for a massive counterstroke, a surprise attack straight through the forest. The goal was Antwerp, the great Allied supply port. Capture it and the Allied front could split. But here was the catch. Germany's fuel reserves were nearly gone. The entire assault would run on captured American gasoline. Not a single drop could be spared. So the plan demanded the tanks seize the big Allied fuel dumps early, or the offensive would die. And that single dependency, that is what would bring the whole gamble crashing down. The offensive was set for the 16th of December, 1944. The weather would be its shield. Hitler wanted low cloud and fog, enough to keep the Allied air forces on the ground. Without air cover, the German armor could move by day. That was the one advantage the weather brought. The plan assigned the fuel dumps to specific units. Each tank column had its own target. The most famous target was a huge American fuel dump near the town of Stavelot. That single depot held millions of gallons of gasoline, enough to run the entire German offensive. If the German spearhead reached Stavelot, the war in the West might have turned, but reaching it was the problem. The Ardennes roads were narrow, steep, and few. One bad bridge could stall an entire division. And the Americans had expected a quiet sector, so they had not stocked it with fuel. The German attack came with everything it had. 3 armies hit the line on a front of 70 miles. In the first days, the weather did its job. The sky stayed shut and the tanks rolled forward. But the advance was slow. The roads were choked and the terrain fought the timetable. Every hour of delay burned fuel, and the captured gasoline was still beyond reach. The spearhead pushed towards Stavelot, but a stubborn American rearguard held the vital bridge. The fighting at Stavelot became a hinge of the whole campaign. The fuel dump was the prize, and it was denied. Rather than let it fall to the enemy, the Americans set the dump ablaze. Millions of gallons went up in smoke. The smoke from Stavelot was visible for miles. The German spearhead watched its prize burn. That was a turning point. The fuel that would have carried the offensive was gone. But the German commanders pressed on. The plan could not be abandoned, not yet. The assault had other fuel targets, smaller dumps scattered behind the American line. But these were not enough. The arithmetic of the offensive was brutal and unforgiving. A single German tank division could burn thousands of gallons in one day of movement. And every mile forward made the fuel problem worse. The The supply lines stretched thin. The roads were jammed with traffic. Divisions could not move their supplies forward. Meanwhile, the Americans were moving too. Reinforcements raced toward the breakthrough. The German timetable was slipping. Every hour lost to the mud, and the traffic was fatal. And then, the weather did something the Germans never expected. It began to clear. For days, low cloud had grounded the Allied air forces. That shield was about to vanish. On the 23rd of December, the sky opened. The Allied air power returned in force. Now German tanks moving by day were exposed. Airstrikes hammered the congested roads. Fuel was burning everywhere now, but it was German fuel, and there was almost none left. The spearhead had pushed deep into Belgium, but its tanks were running on fumes. The question is simple. How did a whole army run out of fuel while trying to capture fuel? The answer lies in arithmetic. Fuel demand always outran fuel supply. German planners had calculated the fuel for the push to the Meuse River. They never planned beyond it. The Meuse River was the final objective. Beyond it, they gambled on captured fuel. That was the fatal flaw. The whole plan rested on fuel that was not there yet. By Christmas Eve, the leading German divisions were deep in Belgium, and they were out of gas. The spearhead that was meant to reach Antwerp had stalled. It sat in the snow, silent. Some units tried to keep moving with captured American gasoline, but it was the wrong grade for their engines. American gasoline had a higher octane rating. In German engines, it could cause serious damage. Desperate crews mixed the American fuel anyway. Some engines seized. Some tanks never moved again. In the town of Bastogne, the situation was different. There, the Americans were surrounded and running low on everything. The German ring around Bastogne was tight, but the encircled garrison refused to surrender. On the 22nd of December, the Germans sent a demand: surrender or be destroyed. The American commander's reply became legend, a single word delivered without hesitation. That word, nuts, was more than defiance. It told the Germans the garrison would fight to the end. And so Bastogne held. The ring did not break. The German timetable slipped further. American armor was now rushing north. Patton's Third Army pivoted on a dime. His divisions were spread across the front. Turning them took days of frantic staff work. The same weather that had saved the Germans now delivered them to their fate. Now Allied fighter bombers owned the sky. German columns moved only at night. Every German truck that moved by day risked destruction from the air. And fuel, already scarce, now had to be moved by night, under blackout conditions. The mathematics were now hopeless. Fuel could not reach the spearhead in time. Yet the German High Command refused to accept defeat. Hitler ordered the attack to continue. By the 26th of December, a new objective replaced the Meuse, the town of Bastogne. Bastogne sat on the road network. To push west, the Germans had to take it. But the German divisions around the town were spent. Their fuel was gone. Their strength was fading. Meanwhile, Patton's lead division was closing in. Its tanks were full of fuel and ammunition. On the 26th, the lead American column broke through. The ring around Bastogne was cracked. The relief was a turning point. The German offensive had lost its last momentum. And now, the fuel that had driven the entire plan was gone. The gamble had collapsed on its own arithmetic. The spearhead that was meant to seize Allied fuel now sat frozen in the snow, silent, still, out of gas. But the story was not over. The Germans still held a long bulge in the American line. The bulge was a huge salient, 50 miles deep in places, and it had to be erased. Eisenhower ordered the line to be straightened. The bulge would be cut off at its base. The plan was for Patton's Third Army to strike north. The First Army would strike south. If the two met, the entire German army in the bulge would be trapped. But the Germans saw the danger. Their command ordered a fighting withdrawal from the tip of the bulge. They pulled back to shorten their lines and to conserve the little fuel that remained. On the 3rd of January, the American counteroffensive began. The jaws of the trap moved together. The fighting was brutal. The terrain was forest, snow, and frozen ground. The weather finally cleared for good. Allied aircraft now flew in relentless waves. German tanks that moved by day were hunted from the air. The retreat became a gauntlet. And now the fuel arithmetic turned fully against them. Every mile of retreat cost German gasoline. Vehicles that could not be fueled were destroyed in place. Their crews marched out on foot. The bulge began to shrink. The Americans pushed it back mile by mile. By the 16th of January, the two American armies met. The trap had closed. The Ardennes offensive was over. Hitler's last great gamble in the West had failed. But the cost of that failure was enormous. The bulge had to be erased, and the weather was finally turning. From the 16th of January onward, the Americans drove the Germans back toward their start line. The German retreat was orderly at first, but it was also a retreat that burned fuel by the hour. Every panzer that pulled back consumed gasoline it could not replace. Fuel was now the enemy of speed. And the Allied air power that had been grounded for weeks now flew without pause. The retreating German columns were now hunted from the sky. Every daylight move was a risk. By late January, the German army in the Ardennes had lost nearly all of its armor and vehicles. The official German count was staggering. Roughly 800 tanks and assault guns were lost in the offensive. And those losses could not be replaced. Germany's factories were already under Allied bombs. On the 28th of January, the Americans declared the bulge eliminated. The line was straight again. The Battle of the Bulge was over, but the bill for it was written in two very different columns. For the Allies, the cost was heavy but replaceable. For Germany, it was a wound that never healed. Historians now count the American losses in the battle. They number in the tens of thousands. The German losses were comparable and far more damaging. Germany could not replace a single man or tank. And here is the deepest irony of the whole offensive. The prize was never fuel at all. The fuel was only the means. The real prize was time to force a separate peace before the West and East closed in. But the bloodletting did not end when the line was straight again. The battle for the Bulge was one engagement in a much larger war. And the real lesson of the Ardennes was written in fuel statistics. Historians estimate the Germans captured around 1.5 million gallons of Allied fuel in the early days. That sounds like a fortune, but it was a fraction of what the plan demanded. The German offensive was calculated to burn over 5 million gallons in its first phase alone. The captured fuel was gone almost immediately. The arithmetic never added up. Why did the Germans gamble everything on fuel they did not have? The answer lies in the desperate arithmetic of a collapsing war economy. By late 1944, Allied bombing had gutted Germany's synthetic fuel production. German fuel output had collapsed to a small fraction of its peak. The Strategic Bombing Survey later reported German aviation fuel output fell by about 90%. That single statistic explains the entire Ardennes gamble. Germany could not win a war of attrition. It could only win by one sudden, decisive stroke. The fuel gamble was not madness. It was the last rational move left on the board. But a gamble built on captured fuel is only sound if the capture happens on schedule. So what actually went wrong on the road to the Meuse? The first answer is the weather. It saved the Germans at the start. For the first week, a heavy cloud deck grounded every Allied aircraft in the sector. That is why the German columns could move by daylight without being torn apart from above. But the same weather that hid the tanks also buried the road network in deep snow. The German plan depended on speed, and speed depended on roads that were now ice. And there was a second, deadlier problem. The roads themselves were a trap. The Ardennes was a maze of narrow, single-lane forest tracks. The German planners knew this. They built their whole timetable around a few key roads. But a single broken-down tank could block a whole division for hours. And the heavier the tank, the faster the roads broke down under its weight. The fuel-hungry monsters that were supposed to win the war were also the ones that tore up the roads. A single Tiger tank burned fuel at a staggering rate, and it was nearly impossible to move quietly. So the plan had a contradiction at its heart. It needed speed, but its machines destroyed the very road's speed required. Every mile the Germans gained came at the cost of minutes they could not afford. And behind the front, the fuel crisis was already tightening its grip on the entire offensive. By the second week, the German spearheads were running on fumes and borrowed time. The Spearhead Division had been ordered to seize the fuel depot at a town called Stavelot. Stavelot held one of the largest Allied fuel dumps in the entire theater. Capturing it intact would have filled the German tanks for the final dash to the Meuse. But the Americans guarding that fuel had no intention of letting it fall into German hands. As the German tanks approached, the order came down: burn it, all of it. Tens of thousands of gallons went up in a pillar of fire before the Germans could take a single drop. The prize the whole offensive depended on had become a torch in the snow. And Stavelot was not the only depot the Germans came just too late to capture. Across the whole offensive, the same scene repeated. Allied fuel burned before German hands could touch it. The German plan had counted on capturing fuel. The Allies had counted on denying it. That quiet arithmetic decided more of the battle than any single tank duel. But even as the fuel burned, the weather was about to turn against the Germans for the last time. On December 23rd, the cloud deck finally broke open across the entire front. And with the clear sky came the one weapon the Germans had feared from the very first day. For the first time in a week, the Allied air forces could finally see the roads below. Now the sky belonged to the Allies, and the sky was where the battle would be decided. American fighter bombers rose from their forward airfields in waves. Their target was not the German tanks in the field, it was the fuel behind them. A German tank that could not move was just a steel target on a road. So the Allied pilots hunted the supply columns that fed the offensive. The German columns, once hidden by cloud, were now completely exposed. For the first time, the German advance could not move by daylight. Every hour of daylight now cost the Germans vehicles they could not replace. And the fuel crisis grew sharper with every passing day. German commanders began issuing orders that would have been unthinkable a week earlier. Tanks were ordered to stop and let the infantry move ahead on foot. The spearhead that was supposed to race to the Meuse was now walking. An offensive built on speed had become an offensive that could barely crawl. And every day the offensive stalled, the Allies grew stronger behind it. The German gamble had one window, and that window was closing fast. Now the question was no longer whether the Germans would reach the Meuse. It was whether they could hold even what they had taken. The German High Command had one last hope, a miracle in the form of captured fuel. But every fuel dump they reached had already been emptied or set ablaze. The fuel that should have carried them to the Meuse was smoke on the wind. And without that fuel, the German spearhead could not move at all. So the Germans tried the last card in their hand, a raid on a fuel depot they could still reach. One such depot sat near a crossroads the Germans had nearly taken in the first days. But the Americans had learned their lesson at Stavelot. The fuel would not be left to chance. Fuel was now being treated like the strategic weapon it truly was. And that was exactly what the German quartermasters had feared from the beginning. Every captured gallon was a gamble. Every burned gallon was a defeat they could not undo. By Christmas, the German offensive had lost all momentum in the snow. And the Allies were not content to simply hold the line. They were about to strike back. In the south, General George Patton had already turned his Third Army northward. That turn was one of the most famous maneuvers in American military history. Patton had anticipated the German attack days before it even began. And he had prepared his divisions to pivot at a moment's notice toward any threat. Patton's turn was only half the story. The other half was logistics on a scale the Germans could not match. While Patton's tanks turned north, his quartermasters were moving fuel by the thousands of tons. The American supply system ran on a simple truth: fuel moved faster than it could be burned. And the German side knew it. Their own fuel was measured in days, not tons. Every gallon the Americans delivered was a gallon the Germans could never recover. Now the weather, which had once been the Germans' shield, turned against them completely. The clouds that had protected the German columns for days finally lifted. And with the sky clear, the Allied air forces were finally unleashed in full force. For the first time since the offensive began, the Germans faced the full weight of Allied air power. Their fighters and fighter bombers now roamed the Ardennes almost at will. And they had a very specific target in mind: the fuel that kept the German army breathing. Every German fuel truck that burned on the road was a tank that would never reach the Meuse. The German command now faced a choice: that no commander ever wants to make. Press on with a starving spearhead, or pull back while there was still time to save the army. And at that exact moment, far to the south, Patton's tanks were rolling forward at full throttle. One army running on empty, the other running on full tanks and a supply line that never stopped. The German spearhead was now a ghost of the force that had crossed the border in December. Its tanks were scattered along the roads, silent, their fuel tanks empty and their crews gone. And in those empty fuel tanks lay the answer to a question historians still argue over. Could the offensive have succeeded if the fuel had held out even one more day? The honest answer, most historians agree, is probably not. Because even a full fuel tank could not fix the other problem the Germans had built into their own plan. That problem was the Allied reserve, a wall of American divisions waiting behind the lines. The Germans had bet everything on a quick knockout before those reserves could arrive. But a knockout needs speed, and speed needs fuel, and fuel had run out. So the chain failed at its weakest link, and the weakest link was the one Hitler never wanted to admit existed. That link was simple arithmetic. The Reich did not have enough fuel to fight the war it had started. By late 1944, Allied bombers had cut German fuel production to a fraction of its peak. The Battle of the Bulge was fought on fuel the Reich could not replace. Every gallon burned in the Ardennes was a gallon that could never be burned again anywhere else. And the Allies understood this arithmetic far better than the Germans ever did. The gasoline that fed Patton's tanks was a weapon, and it was a weapon the Germans could not capture, steal, or match. So the German retreat from the Ardennes began not with a surrender, but with a slow, grinding reverse. Hitler had ordered that the Meuse must be reached, but the tanks had no fuel to reach it. By mid-January, the German spearhead was being pushed back toward the line where it had started. The ground they had taken in 10 days of fighting was lost again in a fraction of that time. And yet the battle did not end in a single stroke. It ended in a slow, bitter grind. Fighting in deep snow and freezing fog, both armies paid a terrible price for that ground. But here is the deeper lesson that fuel left behind for every army that came after. An army does not win on bravery alone. It wins on what it can carry and how far. The Battle of the Bulge is remembered for tanks and paratroopers and desperate last stands. But the real story is quieter. It is written in fuel gauges and supply columns. And that quiet story has a name in military history. It is called logistics. A general who ignores logistics is not a genius. He is a gambler with other people's lives. Hitler's gamble failed for many reasons, but every one of them ran through a single resource. The offensive that began with such confidence in December ended in the snow in late January. Germany had thrown its last reserves into the Ardennes, and it had nothing left to show for it. And the fuel that could have changed everything sat 30 miles away, in depots that were never touched. So we have to ask a harder question: what did the Americans learn from all of it? The answer shaped every American campaign for the rest of the war, and long after. The Americans looked at the German failure and drew one clear conclusion. You cannot run a modern war on a hope and a prayer of captured fuel. So the United States built the supply system to prove it, on a scale the world had never seen. The Red Ball Express moved fuel and ammunition across France with relentless, round-the-clock urgency. At its peak, that convoy moved over 12,000 tons of supplies every single day. And here is the contrast that mattered most. The Germans never had anything like it. By 1944, much of the German army still moved by horse, not by truck. Horses do not need gasoline, but they cannot outrun an army that runs on it. That was the real gap between the two armies, not courage, not even numbers. It was the gap between an army that could move its fuel and one that could not. And that lesson did not end with World War II. It became the doctrine of every modern army. Every armored commander since has been taught the same arithmetic Hitler refused to learn. Fuel is not a detail of war, it is the spine that every plan hangs on. So the Battle of the Bulge left a legacy that outlived the snow and the guns by decades. That legacy is still visible today in every field manual and every supply doctrine. But the battle itself left one more hard truth that is easy to forget. The fuel gamble did not just cost Germany the offensive, it cost the German army its last chance. After January of 1945, the Wehrmacht in the West had no reserves left to fight with. The divisions thrown into the Ardennes were the ones meant to defend the Rhine. Now those divisions were burned out, their tanks abandoned for want of a few gallons. And that is the cruel arithmetic of a fuel gamble. You lose the battle, and then you lose the war. So let us step back and ask the question historians still debate today. Could the Ardennes offensive ever have worked, even with enough fuel? The honest answer from most historians is no. The odds were stacked too high. Even a fully fueled army faced Allied air power the moment the weather cleared. And it faced a supply line the Germans could not match, no matter how much fuel they seized. But fuel was the one thing that could have kept the dream alive long enough to matter. Instead, the dream died in a frozen field, with empty tanks and empty promises. And that brings us to the final chapter of this story, and to what it means for the men who fought. Because behind every empty fuel gauge, there was a crew that fought to the last drop of what they had. When the fuel ran out, the crews did not simply walk away. They fought on foot, with rifles and grenades in the frozen woods. Tank crews became riflemen overnight, mechanics became medics. And the American infantry, dug in and outnumbered, held the lines. At Bastogne, the town the Germans had to take, the ring held for days. The German tanks that reached Bastogne arrived with nearly empty fuel tanks. Without fuel, armored warfare becomes a siege of helpless steel. And the weather that had protected the Germans finally turned against them. On December 23rd, the overcast lifted, the skies opened. And with it, the Allied air forces that had been grounded for a week. Now every German column was a target visible from the air. Fuel trucks were the first priority. A single bomb could stop a division. The weather that had been Hitler's shield became his executioner. And on Christmas Eve, the Americans broke the siege of Bastogne from the air. Ammunition, food, and medical supplies fell into the frozen perimeter. The garrison that had been told to surrender was now resupplied and ready to fight on. And that is the final irony of Hitler's last gamble in the West. The offensive, meant to split the Allied line, instead sealed the fate of the German army. By the spring of 1945, the Western Allies crossed the Rhine almost unopposed. The divisions that should have defended that river were gone, spent in the Ardennes snow. So the question stands, was the fuel gamble the single greatest miscalculation of the war? It was not the only one, but it was the one that made every other failure inevitable. Because armies do not move on morale alone, they move on fuel, food, and ammunition. And that is the lesson the Ardennes burned into every military planner who followed. Logistics is not the glamorous part of war, it is the part that decides who wins. In the end, Hitler's last offensive was not defeated by a single general or a single battle. It was defeated by a simple truth: an army runs on fuel, and the reckoning always comes.